moderator today for our American Marketing Association Detroit Chapter's webinar, The Backlash Against Smartphone Addiction, Understanding Its Impact on Gen Z, is Dave Tednuko, AMA's Detroit Special Interest Group Chair. Dave is one of the founding partners at Clarity Research with offices in North Carolina and Rochester Hills, Michigan. Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks, Holly. Again, thanks to Raymond for sponsoring and hosting this webinar. Really appreciate it, and thanks to all of you for participating. This is our 16th MRSIG, and we're very pleased to have Mike Mercier here. Mike is based in Cincinnati, and he's president of Screen Education, a nonprofit organization dedicated to mitigating the negative consequences of screen addiction through research, education, and consulting. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Dave. So again, this is about the backlash against smartphone addiction and the impact that it's going to have on Gen Z. And before I get started, I was wondering, there'll be a couple of 2 or 3 polling questions, so you should see a poll pop up. So if you could, I would just be interested in knowing how many people were aware that there was actually a backlash that had started against smartphone addiction prior to learning about this webinar. And I believe we'll see the polling results once everyone has answered. There's a time limit of 30 seconds, so. This is a list of the topics that I'll be covering, and the first bullet point there, Gen Z is screen addicted. What I'll basically do is look at the last 2 years of news and information we've received about smartphone addiction and weave it together into a narrative that it really does tell a story. So I'll illustrate that story for you with news events. And that will lead us up to the second bullet point, which is society wants to help. And the point there is that that's all about the backlash. And what's basically happening is we've established that these kids are severely addicted to their phones, and now society's stepping up and they want to address the problem. They want to cut screen time. And this constitutes a backlash against smartphone addiction. So I'll lay out the approach that society is taking so far in doing this and where I think it will go. The third bullet point, Gen Z wants help. This is sort of a unique point that I want to make, and it's based upon my own research with members of Gen Z and also with schools, with school administrators and teachers that have actually implemented no phone policies. And basically, my research is beginning to reveal that kids are, while we think of them as being addicted and we know that we have to battle with kids to get put their phones down and turn their screens off, the research that I'm doing is revealing that they actually want help. And this is what leads me to believe that we're really going to see a transformation in Gen Z, because basically we have society trying to impose change on them. And I'm finding a certain portion, not all of them, they're not monolithic, but a certain portion, I think it's going to be sizable, wants help and they want to cut their phone time. So if you have a force pushing on you to do something and you're receptive to doing that, you're going to change. And I'll lay out how I think they will change. And then the fifth bullet point there is, given how it looks like they should change, what can marketers do if they want to help, but also to respond to the change in terms of designing products and services and marketing. So, okay, it looks, oh, I just missed the poll numbers. It looked like oh, all right, well, I missed the results. Sorry about that. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so there's another polling question. There should be another poll popping up here. And this is, I'm wondering if you're attending this webinar solely out of personal interest, or is it because you're required to understand Gen Z as part of your job? So again, this is a 30-second poll. So if you could answer that question. Now I'm moving on to the first topic here. I said Gen Z is screen addicted, and I said I would lay out a narrative. Okay, it looks like, okay, most people didn't answer. 22% are doing it out of personal interest, 11% for their job. Okay. So So Gen Z is screen addicted, and I said there's been a lot of news in the last 2 years about this, and I would lay it out in a narrative. So if we go back to 2016, 2016 really was the year that it became official, when society basically said, it's official, we acknowledge this, these young people are addicted to their phones. And that year, a couple of studies came out that showed this, and the most critical one was by Common Sense Media, which is a nonprofit that advocates for kids. It's based in San Francisco, and they did a national survey. They surveyed 620 households, and in each household they paired up a parent and a kid, so they surveyed both. And 50% of the teens that they surveyed admitted that they feel like they're addicted to their mobile devices. And then 59% of the parents said, I feel that my kid is addicted to his or her mobile device. And the other remarkable finding was that kids were spending between 5 and 9 hours a day on their phones. So this is like the rubber stamp saying it's official, the kids are addicted. So we advanced to 2017, and there were a number of revelations in this narrative in 2017 that were really critical and profound, I think. So the first one was concluding that this addiction really is hurting Generation Z. So most people who, when they got a phone 7 years ago, they started to feel themselves become addicted to their phone. It's very common. People talk about it. And they saw that what happened to the kids when they gave them a phone or an iPod. They basically became like zombies, and people would talk about this. So we all had a sense that there was a problem, but in 2017, there was a lot of research that came out that really confirmed it and made it official. And the biggest sort of landmark study was by Jean Twenge, who is a psychologist at San Diego State. And Jean looked at survey data that was published by the U.S. government. I guess the government does annual surveys, and they do a number of them across generations. And it's publicly available. Any one of us could go look at this data. So Jean analyzed the data and looked over 25 years, and she noticed in 2012 measures of psychological health for Gen Z basically dropped, it was like it dropped off a cliff when you look at the graphs. And she realized that 2012 was the year that smartphones hit 50% saturation in terms of the ownership in the U.S. population. So it became clear to Jean that the problems she was seeing were correlating with social media use and smartphone use among kids. And the problems were things like this. She saw measures of anxiety go through the roof. She saw measures of depression go through the roof. She saw suicide take a strong uptick. Socialization, kids stopped dating. I mean, incidents of dating dropped precipitously. And measures of independence from parents dropped. So she was concerned. She put an article out in the Atlantic Monthly that went viral. This was in early September, called "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" And this went viral, and she received a lot of media coverage for this, did a lot of interviews, and it was covered extensively. So it's sort of imprinted in everyone's minds. It's official. We have a serious problem here. The article she published was to promote her book called iGen, which was basically a book-length analysis of the data. And I wanted to show you this is one of the graphs from her book. And if you look at I don't know if you can read that, but the left-hand vertical axis, it's the percent of the population with high depressive symptoms. And it's arrayed across the horizontal axis by year. And if you look at 2012, that's when everything spikes. So the light line is girls, and the dark line is boys. These are teens. And you can see the girls' incidence of highly depressive symptoms spiked by about 9%, and the boys jumped 3%. So her book is filled with graphs like this that show big spikes or straight drop-offs. So the narrative continues. So we know that they're addicted, and it's official, it's really hurting them. And then we learn in 2017 that it's really intentional, that Silicon Valley apps developers had analyzed the mechanisms of screen addiction. They analyzed it and figured out what are the components that make someone addicted to these apps. And then they started working with psychologists, neuroscientists, and expert product developers to engineer their apps to be optimally addictive. They wanted to make them as addictive as they could. And there was a great book published in March of last year by a psychology professor at NYU named Adam Alter. and it was titled The Irresistible, The Rise of Addictive Technology and the Business of Keeping Us Hooked. And Adam basically interviewed a bunch of apps developers and addiction experts and wrote this book, and basically said, he laid it all out and said, this is what they're doing, they know what they're doing, this is how they're making these things addictive, this is how people are reacting to it, they're developing this behavioral addiction. It's kind of like gambling, where you're not addicted to a substance, but you're addicted to a behavior, okay? And he received a lot of media coverage on this book. And then the next month, Anderson Cooper covered this on 60 Minutes. He did a segment called Brain Hacking, where he basically went out to Silicon Valley and talked to the same people. So this sort of made it official. Everyone, you know, it basically let everyone know that, okay, the kids are really addicted and it's intentional. The next step in the narrative was, we learned in 2017, they're making these things addictive, and they know that it's hurting the kids, but they aren't concerned about your kids. And the real symbol in 2017 of this was an interview that Sean Parker did in November with Axios. And Sean Parker was the first CEO of Facebook. So he was reflecting on his time at Facebook, and he said, Facebook was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible by exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. We understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. And there was also a young man named Tristan Harris who worked at Google, and he started going public with his insights. He was an ethicist at Google, and he basically felt like he had to be a whistleblower, and he came out and talked about this too, that they know what they're doing and they don't care. And then the final nail in the coffin in this narrative was the news that they don't care about your kids, but they're going to protect their own kids. So there were three basic iconic examples that were repeated about this. One was an interview Steve Jobs had done sometime before he passed away. And I don't remember who interviewed him. I forget the guy's name, but he basically asked Steve at one point, how do your kids like the iPad? And this was 2 years after the iPad had been out, and Steve said, well, they've never used one. We don't let them use them. And then it was also highly publicized, actually for a couple of years, that executives in Silicon Valley send their kids to the Waldorf schools, which, if you're not familiar with them, it's an international chain of K-12 schools that do not allow screens. So not only do they not allow kids to bring their smartphones to school, they don't have screens in the school. And it was, you know, Adam Alter talked about this in his book, that they don't allow, you know, that these executives are sending their kids to those schools. And then the final big example here was Chamath Palihapitiya. He was an executive at Facebook, and he revealed last year, he said basically Facebook was destroying the fabric of society, and that he doesn't allow his kids to use Facebook, and then he claimed that he didn't allow them to use any screen time whatsoever. So that's the narrative, and if you just sit back and think about it, if any decent moral society that learns that there's a group of people that are intentionally designing something that they're going to put into the hands of your children to get them addicted to it so they can make money off of it, and they know it's hurting them, but they don't care. They're going to keep doing it, but they're going to protect their own kids. That's the narrative. What's any society going to do? It's going to go to battle, and that's basically what's happened now. The backlash has begun, and I think that it was in November. Sean Parker, his statement in that interview was like the catalyst for the backlash, and the backlash really became official, I think, in January. So this is my whole point here is that we're at the very beginning of this, and I think it's going to be huge. I think there's a lot of energy, and there's going to be a big cultural force behind this, and it's going to bring a lot of change. So here we are with the backlash. Society wants to help the kids. And the ultimate goal is to reduce the time these kids spend on their screens. And there are four ways that I've seen so far that this is being attempted. And one of them is to impose screen time limits. So it's basically, you know, we see governments, schools, and parents basically mobilizing to say, we want to, from the outside, we're going to reach in and impose limits on you. We're going to limit your access to screens. And the best example of a government doing this is France. They announced in December, and this was the French Ministry of Education, so part of the French government, that nationally they're going to ban smartphones in schools or cell phones in schools for, across the country, beginning in the fall of 2018, for kids 15 and under. So that's an enormous move. In America, we haven't seen that kind of movement yet. I know that the state and federal government's being lobbied and educated about this issue right now. I think Common Sense Media is doing some of that. But we know in America, individual schools are banning smartphones, and I've talked to a number of them. And this is an article that shows one of the techniques that they're using. You can see those are little green and black pouches the size of a smartphone, and there's a company named Yonder that produces these. And basically the idea is that kids come to school, they put the phone in the pouch and they close it, and it's actually remotely locked. And I don't know the exact mechanism, but someone in the school office can lock all the pouches simultaneously remotely. So the kids can't open their smartphone, but this allows them to carry their smartphone with them so they don't have to put it in a box somewhere and risk it getting stolen or lost or broken. But there are 600 U.S. schools using this pouch, according to Yonder. So, and the third group that's trying to limit screen time is parents. So we've got a lot of child experts telling parents, limit your kids' screen time. The maximum amount of screen time that they're suggesting is 2 hours, but for really small kids, they're saying no screen time. So limiting screen time is one approach. Another approach that's being taken is to pressure Silicon Valley to redesign apps so that they're not addictive, or even remove apps from the market that are addictive, and also to engineer them so that they have controls that parents or kids can use to limit their screen time. And this pressure is being brought to bear upon Silicon Valley by shareholders, stockholders, advocacy groups, and lobbyists. So a lot of people probably saw this in the news in early January. 2 institutional stockholders of Apple, and combined they owned $2 billion worth of Apple stock, published an open letter to Apple's board of directors and basically said, we know that this is a serious problem. We need to address it as an industry. If we don't, then eventually regulators and advocacy groups are going to come in and force us to, and it's going to hurt the stock price. So we demand and expect that Apple will be a leader in this, and we want you to do research on the problem and then develop controls that are intuitive for parents that they can easily use to control their kids' screen time. So that's an example of the shareholders. Then we have, with Facebook Messenger, they developed a version called Messenger Kids that was targeting kids 6 to 13, and all these child advocacy groups and child health experts came out and said, we want you to withdraw this from the market, and Facebook actually refused. So we know that there's a battle lining up. I believe this is going to be discussed this week. I think someone told me on the Today Show, and I think someone said Tucker Carlson's covering it tonight too, this very issue. And then lobbying. So there's a group, I mentioned this young man who left Google, who was the ethicist. He started an organization called the Center for Humane Technology, and he's really working hard. You can see here he's been interviewed and featured on all these major media outlets. And he's really pushing, it says here, reversing the digital attention crisis and realigning technology with humanity's best interests. So he's basically trying to educate people and create a buzz to put pressure on lawmakers and apps developers to say, look, we got to do something about this. Another approach that's being, that I have not seen nearly as much, but I have to believe it's going to happen. Much of the focus, as you can see so far, has been on imposing limits from the top down, right, on kids. But it just makes sense that we have to have a complement to that, which is to help the kids develop internally the ability to self-limit, because if they can't self-limit, of course, once they get older and leave, you know, the institutions or situations where their limits are being imposed on them, where are they going to be? So eventually, I believe we're going to see a larger movement to actually teach kids that, you know, how this is working, that these apps companies are going after them, that their attention is the target, that's the bounty they're hunting, that they're doing this for money, and it's causing you a lot of problems. Here are the problems it's causing you. We want to awaken them, right? This movement toward mindfulness, higher consciousness, awareness of what's going on. and recognition of how it's hurting them so that they can develop the ability to self-limit. So this is an example. This you can see at the top there with Thrive Global. This is a company that Arianna Huffington started about 1.5 years ago. And she initially raised $1 million to start the company. And basically, this company is going to be going in, this is for adults. So this company is targeting adults, but it's going to go to corporations. And it's going to say, look, we want to help your employees become healthier and less stressed. We're developing tools and programs to help them and educate them about nutrition, stress management, getting enough sleep, eating well, getting exercise, and unplugging. That's one of the components is unplugging. And if you look at the website, it's all framed to a great extent around this whole idea of mindfulness. And I actually last week talked to someone in Silicon Valley who said, oh, well, everyone here is talking about being more mindful about using their phone. So I believe we're going to see a movement. It's going to start to permeate the culture about we have to be more mindful. That's one of the techniques that's going to be used, right, to be more mindful, develop our consciousness. And I believe it'll trickle down to the kids. And even with the kids, if we don't use the term mindfulness, we'll still be talking about the same approach, right, raising their consciousness. But this is an example of an article that appeared on her website, how mindfulness helped me outsmart my smartphone, and she basically broke her addiction. Here's another example. This is a summer camp that launched this year, and this summer is going to be the first time they're in business. And I've actually talked to the guy that started it. He had previously owned a chain of summer camps that helped kids with obesity, and he developed a program that helped them, become more mindful and conscious of their eating habits, and simultaneously, while they're in this controlled environment, it limited their food intake and got them to eat healthy. And he's applying the same model to a summer camp for smartphone addiction. He'll have 2 locations initially, one in California, one in North Carolina. But it's the same idea. Kids will go to this camp for 1, 2, 3 months. They'll be away from screens. They'll be getting out in nature, doing physical activities, face-to-face interaction, and they'll be reflecting. They'll be keeping diaries, and they'll have other programs to help them reflect and become aware of their issues. But they'll also be setting them up to have an approach for when they return back home, so that they can limit their and control their screen time. Another way that approach that's being taken is to change the culture, and that's basically what we're going to see is the insertion of the virtue of unplugging into our collective value system. And we'll be doing that. Here's an example. I'm labeling this ritualization. So this was an ad that was actually this was developed by Common Sense Media, and it's like a public service announcement ad saying, when you have dinner, let's turn the phones off. All right. So this ad shows how it's the dad, Will Ferrell, is distracted by his phone, and it's disturbing to the kids. So I'm just going through a couple of efforts here to raise consciousness. This is the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. They have a test you can take to see if you're addicted to your phone. Of course, major media coverage. This is the 1A, which you probably know is one of the, it replaced the Diane Rehm show. It's an NPR show that's got syndicated on 250 stations. There's another NPR show out of WBUR in Boston, On Point. They're syndicated in about 250 stations. So both of those talk shows, I've monitored them, and they're covering this issue at least like once a month and have been for a year or more. Oops. That's the liberal side. On the conservative side, Tucker Carlson is championing this issue, and he's been attacking it every 2 to 3 weeks. He seems to be going after Silicon Valley for what they've done to kids. This is an example of it permeating the culture. This was a music video developed by Alex Meady. I think it was in like January or so that it came out, December. But basically, it's a music video, and the story is a girl who checks herself into a sort of a rehab sanatorium for smartphone addiction, and it's about her journey in getting off of her smartphone. And this is a screenshot showing the ritual. When you arrive, you have to smash your phone. So those are the things that society's doing. That's the backlash, right? That's the beginning of the backlash. So that's what we're seeing so far, and it's only been a couple of months. And I forgot to mention, Arianna Huffington in November raised another $37 million for her company. So clearly, a lot of money is going to start going behind this effort. and that's for adults, but I think we'll see that obviously with the kids too. So the next point I want to make is that, okay, society's saying we want to help you kids, we want to help you control your screen time. And I made the point that my research is showing that these kids, to some extent, want to cut down on their screen time. And I just want to give you an overview of the research I've done. Well, first of all, this is sort of a framework for thinking about it. If kids are going to change and cut their screen time, right, their ability to change or whether they'll change will be dependent upon their consciousness of the problem and their desire to change. And I just want to show you, I'm finding in my research, now it's been with smaller groups of people. I'm actually working on a national survey now, but this is with smaller studies, that there's a medium consciousness and a high consciousness of this problem. So clearly we're going to have a bunch of kids who don't want to change and they're not aware that there's a problem. It's just normal to them. But we've got a lot of kids who I think it's more unconscious that it's a problem, and when they're placed in a situation where they're deprived of their phone for a few weeks, they awaken and they realize, wow, these phones are really causing me a problem. But then we're going to have another large portion of kids who are already aware that it's a problem, and I'm seeing a lot of that, and they want to change. They already know that they want to change. They wish they could cut their screen time, and some of them have tried to. So, so the research that I've done is with that top point there, teens at summer camps who have been deprived of their phones for 2 to 4 weeks, and I've done 3 different studies with teens at summer camps on this issue. And then I've talked to a lot of teachers and administrators at schools that have placed restrictions on smartphone use. And to sort of summarize here, the reaction when kids are placed in, so the idea is that these kids are going to camps for 2 to 4 weeks where they're not allowed to use phones. They're not allowed to bring them and they don't use them. Excuse me. And we're finding that, yes, there is some frustration. They say that they're frustrated because they're disconnected from their friends, from their family. So they're not saying like, I wish I could get on social media and post stuff, right? They're saying, I can't call my mom when I want to, right? I can't text my friends when I want to. I can't connect with my friends. It might be through social media, but they're not lamenting the fact that they can't access social media, right? They're saying, I feel disconnected. And some of them say that they feel disconnected from world events, what's going on in the world, the news. But if you look at the bullet points below that top one, they're all, pretty positive about getting away from their phone. So I'm finding a lot of kids are saying, I'm relieved to escape the burdens of my phone. And when you ask them what the burdens are, it's like notifications. They say, I'm overwhelmed with notifications. I can't keep up. So clearly they feel like they're supposed to keep up with all the notifications. A lot of them talk about getting away from drama. Some talk about bullying. They talked about how gossip spreads so quickly online, and they're glad to get away from that. I put image management in italics because I have not heard much about that, but other researchers have. We're learning that that's part of the anxiety. It's and the depression, right? It's contrasting. People are projecting their ideal selves onto social media, and it makes a lot of kids feel inferior, and it depresses them. The third point down, they're amazed at how much more they engage with their surroundings, with nature and with other people. They try new activities that they hadn't tried before. The next point down, they're amazed at how much better they get to know others through face-to-face communication. And I will tell you, it's amazing because in some cases, when you hear these kids talk about this, it's almost as though they're so used to communicating through screens. They talk about face-to-face communication as though it's a novel, new experience for them, and they're awakening to it. And they can't believe how much better it is. You can get to know people so much better. We've had kids say they got to know their friends at camp after 4 weeks better than they know some of their friends at home. So, and then they're also shocked at how much better they sleep. They just can't get over it. So the study I did last summer was with the camp, and we had about 60 kids that we were following throughout their experience. And then we waited 4 months after they left camp, and in November, December, we surveyed them. And these are the results. I asked them, I said basically in the survey, you could have experienced, I want to know about your emotional reaction to being deprived of your phone. And you could have experienced simultaneously opposing emotions, gladness and frustration. So in 2 separate questions, I asked, did you experience any gladness and did you experience any frustration in the second question? And these numbers astounded me. So clearly you can see 92% experience gladness, some degree of gladness. only 41% experienced some degree of frustration. That's a 51-point gap. So clearly what they're saying is that they were far more glad to be without their phone than they were frustrated. Some other interesting numbers from that same survey with that group of kids. 42% had attempted, they said that they had attempted to curb their phone use prior to coming to camp. So the 42% said yes, that at some point before coming to camp, I really wanted to reduce my screen time, and they tried to do that. The second point there, 92% said it was beneficial to have gone without their phones while they were at camp. 83% considered having gone without their phones for several weeks to be an important life experience. 35% said they were successful at curbing their phone use after leaving camp. Now, I don't know if that was a one-time thing or if it was a sustained habit, but they at least tried to, right? I didn't get any distinction between those two. And then, remarkably, 17% tried to influence a friend to spend less time on their phone as a result of having gone through the phone deprivation experience. This is a quote I really wanted to share. One of the things we asked in a written questionnaire, we collected data like 4 different times, and we had a written questionnaire that said, what would you like to tell your friends about? If you could tell your friends something about your experience of going without your phone, what would it be? And this was, I thought, a remarkable quote. She said, it was extremely enjoyable, and as a family, we should do it. It's really cool to interact with your acquaintances and family. I would say this because my mom texts me when dinner is ready, and instead of talking to me, we're on our phones during meals. So this just shows, you can see what I was referring to, that, you know, like this face-to-face interaction in some ways sounds like it's a new thing to her, right? And then this is the last piece of data I want to show you, but this was absolutely remarkable to me. I asked the kids, how would camp have been different without your phone? With your phone, if you had been able to bring your phone. And if you think about this, the way to read these responses, it's what they're basically saying, if they can, the only way these kids can tell you how camp would have been different if they had brought their phone is if they reflect on what their life is like back home with their phone, right? So what they're basically saying in these responses, they're saying this is what camp would have been like. This is what camp would have been like. And I'm sorry, I lost my spot here. Yeah, so this is what camp would have been like, but it's just like it is at home. So here are some of the quotes. People would not talk to each other or try new things. They would just stay in the cabin all day. I'd be on my phone more. I would probably stay up late on my phone. Nobody would talk or interact. We would just have our earbuds in and not want to leave the cabin. Everyone would just be zombies. I would have wanted to put everything up on social media. Camp would, you know what? When I go home, I honestly wish it would be like camp, like no social media stuff. No one would make new friends. You wouldn't learn new things. No one would talk to anyone or be motivated to do anything. Everyone would stay in their cabins all day. It would literally be like me hanging out with myself in the middle of nowhere. So you could, these quotes go on and on. I have 3 slides of these, right? But you see the point. They're all talking about, you know, I would probably stay in bed all day on my phone. So they're basically saying, what they're admitting is that if they had brought their phones to camp, they wouldn't be engaging in life, right? They wouldn't be talking to other people. They'd be staying in their cabin staring at a screen. They wouldn't be trying new things. I had kids say things like, I read a book, and when I had free time, because I couldn't get on my phone, I learned a new game to play. So, and then when we do research with schools, when we've talked to schools that have that have implemented no phone policies, these are the changes that they see in kids. They say the kids seem relieved that someone is setting a limit. So they're actually relieved, and the administrators notice this. Their behavior improves, and then this is remarkable. They say kids start forming in physical groups together, and this wasn't happening before. So what they're saying is that kids start aggregating, like in the cafeteria, in the gym, outside, in groups, and talking to each other, and it's noticeable to the administrators because it wasn't happening before, which is absolutely remarkable. So collectively, I hope I've conveyed my point here, that the research that I'm doing is suggesting to me that these kids are going to be, that a good portion of kids are aware that there's a problem and actually want someone to rescue them. They want change. They want limits to be set on this. I remember one kid said he wished his parents would force him to play a sport so he could get off his phone. Like he's so addicted to his phone, he couldn't muster up the will to join the sport himself. So I think a lot of these kids want help. They want to be, you know, liberated. And as a result, I think they're going to be very receptive to efforts to get them off their phones. which means, you know, if you combine those two things, they will change. There'll be some transformation. And I will say, even if the kids weren't receptive to it, if they're going to be forced to go without their phones, there'd be some change. But I think it's going to be more than we might expect or anticipate because of what I'm learning in my research. So here I'm going to, given what we know about the kids' attitudes, and then what you know, what we're learning about smartphone addiction and the efforts to try to curb the use of phones. These are some of the things, changes I think we might anticipate. They might develop a skepticism toward tech companies. So they may become very turned off by tech companies that have tried to hook them without any regard for the well-being. And I don't think many kids have been taught this or realized that this has gone on, but eventually they will, and they could become very skeptical of these companies. They may seek tech tools that will help them unplug, so that they may demand either less addictive apps or demand apps with tools that allow finer controls of features and screen time. And then, since they're going to be spending less time on screens, it only makes sense there's going to be more engagement in non-screen activities. So I think we'll see more face-to-face socializing, more time outside, more time in nature, more dating than we've seen, physical activities, hiking or whatever it might be, more engagement in sports, and probably more board games to replace the screen games. I would also speculate that we will see, in order to develop the ability to self-limit and control their screen use, we're going to have to sort of cultivate and develop certain values in the kids. And I think that will happen naturally as this backlash continues. But the qualities that I can see being required to learn how to self-limit would be this mindfulness we talked about, an emphasis on self-discipline, self-denial, and I think mutual support. I'm actually wondering if it's going to become an open thing where kids actually start helping each other to be strong, and or punishing them in a group, right? If they try to use their phone. And I think we'll see more ritualizing of unplugging. So I think it'll become, we'll start developing rituals or standards for when it's acceptable for everyone to have their screens on and off, right? So there'll be times where it'll become expected to turn our screens off in public. There'll be times when it's, you know, expected that we turn our screens off at home, and there'll be times when we're expected to turn our screens off with friends. I actually had a group I did focus groups with. These were boys at a camp. They'd been at camp for 2 weeks. And one of the boys said, they were 15, and they said, when we have sleepovers, we'll have 6 kids who are sleeping over sitting in a room together silently for 2 hours staring at our screens. So that's the kind of behavior that I think we will probably see start to change. And then given how we think Gen Z will change, what can marketers do to help and to respond? I think specifically for tech companies, you know, there's obviously going to be opportunities, I believe. So new social media, video, and game apps that offer less addictive experiences, or apps that help them, Gen Z, monitor, control, and limit their screen time. In terms of overall product marketing, I think something to think about is how might the channels you're using to reach teens change, right? So if screen time diminishes, then it'll, you know, if they're using them for 5 hours, if they're using their phones for 5 to 9 hours a day and they cut it down to 3, say, right? Clearly, your ability to reach them through the channel of social media, video, and other online apps will be diminished. So you know, this will probably mean marketers will start to look for other channels for getting to them again. In terms of message content, I think there'll be an opportunity to do this implicitly or explicitly, but model a new lifestyle. So my point here is that in your messaging, you want your messaging to mirror the culture, right? And one approach would be to lead the culture, right? If you sense that this is happening and you want to be bold, you could model a new lifestyle before it emerges that basically says it's cool to unplug. And you could also wait until some changes occur and then mirror those unplugging attitudes and behaviors after they emerge. But I think there's definitely going to be a messaging opportunity here to identify with the kids in the messaging of marketing, and also help them, right? If you can cultivate and model an unplugging lifestyle, this would really, I think, benefit kids. And I don't mean just in marketing, in media, TV, film, et cetera, advertising. And then in terms of products and services, there's opportunity, obviously, to satisfy the spike in demand for recreational products and services that will replace screen time recreation. We don't know exactly what they'll be, but this is something that people in marketing, I'm sure, will be monitoring. Develop products and services for Gen Z that help them develop the ability to unplug. So an example would be that summer camp. I'm guessing we'll see other things like that emerge. And then develop products and services for parents and schools that help the parents and the schools help Gen Z unplug. And then from a corporate marketing standpoint, I think there'll be an opportunity to demonstrate through corporate social responsibility initiatives that the corporation supports this unplug movement. So this could, obviously get a company into the good graces of kids and parents if they were to do this. And that's the presentation. We have a final polling question, which is, do you feel that the backlash against smartphone addiction will change our culture? So I'd be interested in seeing how people respond to that. And while people are answering that poll question, anyone can feel free to contact me. I have my email address up here and my phone number. And Dave, I wanted to see if there were any questions that I can answer here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think one question relates to whether kids who are high users of their smartphone do better academically, for example, on their overall GPA or SAT or ACT scores than those who are low users.
I have seen something in searching online. I have seen something that says that schools where they've banned the smartphones, that the kids have done better. And then there was a study, and I think it's been repeated. It was published last year, like in May, I believe, at UT Austin, where they had at a college, they had a large group take a test. It was a huge, hall class. So a third of them took the test with their phone sitting on their desk with the turned on. A third took the test with the phone sitting on the desk but turned off, and a third took the test without any phone visible or present. And the people who took the test with no phone present did far better than the other people. And they concluded that basically just the presence of the phone is taking some of your cognitive capacity. It's siphoning your attention, even if you're not looking at it. You're wanting to look at it. So, but I haven't seen anything that's really comprehensive. But I think there's a suggestion, because the phones are shortening kids' attention spans. They're distracted. Kids are using them during class. I mean, I've heard horrific stories about what goes on. So they're clearly not paying attention. It's consuming their time. They're multitasking when they're doing homework, doing like 3 or 4 things while they're trying to do homework, and it's pretty clear from anecdotally that it's hurting kids' grades and academic performance and learning.
Another question is, how does banning smartphones in schools meet the issue of the violence in schools? I mean, to the extent that you may have violence or a parent or vice versa wants to contact a kid in school by banning phones, how do you reconcile that?
I'm sorry, what's the violence connection? Do you mean?
Whether it's gun violence or encroachment in the school, if somebody, like the recent violence in the schools, right? the gun attacks. I mean, to the extent that you ban smartphones in a school, what impact, reconciliation, if you will, between those two forces do you see?
I don't know, and this is something, there are two teachers that wrote a book. It was published in October, and I don't remember the name of it, but they're teachers who address this whole issue of, basically arguing that we don't need to have phones. And one of the things they talked about is parents are so concerned, like, well, what if there's an emergency? And these are teachers, and their response was, call the school, call the principal's office, and you can get a message to the kids instantly, right? But, I mean, that doesn't address what you're talking about. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. Clearly, if there is a school shooting at a school and kids, don't have a phone on them, then, yeah, a parent can contact them. I guess that's something that'll have to be worked out, you know what I mean, as society grapples with this and thinks it through, It's a cost-benefit question, and I don't know. I think some schools will want to ban the phones and others won't. So
that's another question in terms of, tracking kids longitudinally. So let's say after they graduate high school, I mean, and for those schools that ban phones in the high school versus those schools that don't, academically or non-academically, does phone usage decrease for kids who've gone to a high school where phones are banned versus not?
Well, I haven't seen anything. So you're saying if a school bans phones, do the kids use the phones less back at home? Is that the point?
Well, or after they graduate. So let's say they go 4 years high school, and this high school does not allow any phones. This high school does. And theoretically, could that be a factor in once they graduate the high school level, do they use their phones less because of that banning in high school A versus the same, I mean, an independent sample?
I don't know. I haven't seen, this is so new, I don't think they've gotten that far, you know what I mean, tracking graduates, it's so brand new. I don't think there's been anything like that I've seen. I really doubt it, so I don't know.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Just pop them up on the chat. Otherwise, give it a minute or two. I think it was very, very interesting, Mike, and appreciate your time. If there's any questions not covered by, Mike's presentation, obviously he got his contact information. This will be uploaded to YouTube soon. I'm not sure exactly when we're going to do that, but it will be uploaded, the entire presentation. For future events, you can just go to amadetroit.org. As Holly mentioned early on, the next event is March Mix and Mingle on March 13th for those in the Detroit area at Hopcat in Royal Oak, Michigan. It's from 6 to 8. And you can register for that event, again, at amadetroit.org. There's other events. There's a Rapid Innovation Marketing event. It's the fifth annual, actually, John Ganga Scholarship event at the MSU Extension Center in Troy, Michigan. It's on April 12th, 6 to 8:30. It's a scholarship at Michigan State for their Masters in Market Research program in honor of John Gangas. And so those are a couple events upcoming. And just keep track of amadetroit.org for future events. I think that concludes our program. Anything, final words, Mike?
Nope, that's it. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.